And now I'd like to introduce Ashleigh. Rousey Range.
It was the fall of 2007, my last year in undergrad at Georgia Tech, and the night before the senior career fair. I had a long list of companies that I had researched, ready to wow them with my resume, my research of their companies, and my non-regional diction. You see, I had started Georgia Tech as a biomedical engineering major, just because, honestly, it sounded prestigious. But then biochemistry happened, and things went downhill very quickly. But around that same time, someone introduced me to the magical area of study called industrial engineering, where you could improve processes, make plans, and even use math to do it. Ever since I single-handedly planned my 8th birthday party, I created all of the invitation lists, gave my mom a schedule of where we would head to the stores for favors and decorations. Not surprising, Shereen? I've been what you might call a planner. And to combine my natural proclivity for process optimization with engineering and do that professionally, well, that was a dream. So I'm about to head to the career fair with a pretty decent resume that I'd worked hard for. And I had recently heard of this other profession where you didn't really have to work for a company that did anything so much as tell other companies how to do what they do. Called consulting. Yeah. So I saw this as the culminating achievement to 18 long, hard years of school, and I went hard after it. The consulting firm seemed to like me, and I enjoyed getting wined and dined at interviews. And it seemed like I was well on track to being a jet-setting professional consultant with all the perks. There was just one little problem. Well, I was in love. So that man, that beautiful man over there with that gorgeous beard. So you see, my wonderful husband, who I might add at this point has had 7 successful years as an engineer, at the time did not share my same passion for hard work or going to class or even getting passing grades. In undergrad. His resume didn't quite shine like mine did, but I knew I wanted to marry him, and we were engaged at the time. I was understandably frustrated that my employment options were limited by, his inability to get a job, essentially. I had zero control over that. So this tension between what I felt I deserved in a potential job and what I was apparently going to be limited to, combined with a self and society-imposed expectation to be a happy homemaker wife, not necessarily a career power woman, built and built and built through recruiting season to the night I'm describing. When, after a particularly long session of hashing out our future plans, I turned and yelled to the entire sorority house,
"Listen, ladies, it doesn't matter how hard you work. Don't work for grades, it doesn't matter. All that ends up mattering is that you look good and find a husband. That's all you can ever aspire to."
Yeah, intense, I know. So initially I had a few minor issues with finding my identity, balancing professional and personal life. I'm sure that's a struggle many of you in here can relate to tonight. But there's a potentially obscured and maybe unexpected moral to this story. And if you're not careful, you'll miss it behind the follow your dreams and everything will work out. The reason why I give you this window into a time in my life when I didn't know how things could work out, honestly, I didn't see a way they could work out, is to explain to you what ultimately is the guiding force behind the path I've taken in my life. There were just so many variables that I couldn't control for in that one little life transition. Where could Brad get a job? What city should we live in? whether or not he would decide I was crazy enough that he didn't want to marry me after all. Too many variables for me to optimize. Too many for me to plan for. I could not handle it. Fast forward to this semester, and there are more variables that I can't control for. Minor ones like when are papers due, but major ones too. What if I had stayed at the Boston Marathon finish line just 15 minutes longer? I was right there. At that same week, I was walking home from Walker Memorial to Eastgate, like many of you, at the exact same time that the gunmen were making their way from Stata to 3rd Street. I took a parallel path, not 100 feet away from him. What if he had turned towards Memorial Drive? And then you have other things that were outside of my control that marked my first year at Sloan. My aunt died of cancer at age 42, leaving my 4 cousins aged 8 to 14. Then you have a situation like Nikita's passing earlier this year, and she was involved with our Bible study at Sloan Christian Fellowship. And you're left asking, what could I have done? What do I do? Do I have control over anything in this life? The perhaps unique perspective that I'd like to share with you tonight is that the short answer to that question is no. We don't have control over much of anything, really. We have illusions of control that we comfort ourselves with. But at the end of the day, we do not have a cognitive category for things like pressure cookers exploding at a road race, or a mother not much older than me passing away and leaving 4 beautiful girls. Or something like our fellow classmate being here one day and just gone the next. Or maybe something comparatively simple, like forecasting. Where are we going to live next year? What will we do for work? And even if we have signed offer letters with 6-figure salaries, and we think that our families are happy and healthy, there's not one of us in here tonight whose lives could not be shattered with just one single phone call. All right, I want everyone in here to humor me for a second. I want you to find your pulse. I'm not kidding, everyone do it. Most of us take completely for granted that our hearts just beat. But what I want to impress on you tonight, the best example of how not in control we are, is this simple fact. Someday, that beating won't do that anymore. It's not morbid. Denying that fact is intellectually dishonest, bordering on willful ignorance. The Bible says that we are a vapor, a mist that is here today and gone today. It also says that a man who lives like he's never going to die is the height of foolish self-delusion. Because if there's one undeniable fact that we've all been faced with this year, between Nikita and the bombings and Sean Collier, it's that we're all going to die and that none of us have any real control over it. So where does this leave us? I mentioned the Bible says, both because I believe what it says and to demonstrate that what it says has bearing over our everyday lives and the struggles that we face. I'm here as a logical, thinking fellow classmate to declare that I believe that even though we have almost no control over what happens in this life, there is a God who is in absolute control. And here's the best news. He is absolutely loving and caring. So I can tell you how things ended up after that blow up in my sorority house all those years ago. Like so many other times in my life that God provided for, He orchestrated all the details in ways that I cannot even begin to explain to you. Brad got a great engineering job. I ended up being that great, consultant. Then in another big transition we really struggled through, God brought us here to Boston when we thought there was no logical way of us getting here. I could fill another 10 minutes with the hurdles he overcame there. Then he blessed us with a beautiful baby boy just 3 months ago. The biggest reason for us not wanting to come here was that we didn't want to delay starting our family. Look how we worked that out. He continues to work out all the details in amazing ways that would take a whole nother yarn to describe to you. Now, I do recognize that my examples of God's provision do leave a gaping hole. He has seen us through interesting transitions in our lives, and he did let me leave the finish line at just the right moment. But what happens when all the details don't fall into place? And what about the folks that didn't leave the finish line at the same time I did? What about the handful of friends that I have that have really struggled to get pregnant when my baby Noah came almost just by thinking of him? I certainly don't deserve any of the good things he's blessed me with. Quite the contrary. I don't have time to give an appropriate treatment of God's sovereignty and the nature of evil, and honestly, that's more of my husband's deal, so if you want to debate with him about that, please feel free. But my point is that even when my aunt died and left those 4 girls behind, and even in tragedies like the marathon and Nikita's passing, my faith allows me to believe that God is still good, and he is still in control. We just don't always see everything that he can. All right, so if you tuned out as soon as I said God and the Bible, I want you to tune back in with me for a second, okay? Because I think there are a couple applications of what I've been talking about tonight that we can all get behind regardless of worldview, okay? First, recognize that every interaction you have with a fellow Sloanie is a warm-blooded, feeling human being just like you. So often, many of our interactions are reduced to transactional, surface-level pleasantries that incentivize us to pretend that everything's great. Yeah, I'm working for that startup. Sure, I can connect you with him on LinkedIn. Meanwhile, maybe there's a Nikita behind that face in front of you, slowly breaking apart. The culture we should encourage here at Sloan should have you look at your fellow classmates as more than just future networking connections and job leads, but as human beings who all struggle, and that's okay. Secondly, I'd encourage you to take some time to think about your own mortality. It's not a happy subject, but our death is an inevitability that does bear some thinking about. If we're honest, everything else should take a back seat until we get this one figured out. In face of the recent tragedies, it's intellectually dishonest to ignore. I certainly thought about it again after being so close to the bombings and the shooter. Whatever you do with your conclusions should help inform how you live your life, even down to your day-to-day actions here at Sloan. The worldview to which I ascribe finds hope in the face of the inevitability of death, because we follow the teaching of the only man who died and came back to tell us about it. So yes, death still scares me sometimes, but a lot less, because I know that God, Jesus, knows what he's talking about. If you'd like to talk more about my faith, my husband or I or any of the leaders here in Sloan Christian Fellowship would be happy to speak with you. So no, we are not in control. God is. We can't see what's going on under the surface, so take time to get to know your classmates on a personal level. And yes, we are all going to die, and we don't know when. So that should affect how you live and think today. These are the things that I've been reminded of in my time here at Sloan, things that have strengthened my faith and helped me lead Sloan Christian Fellowship through a very difficult year. They're not the most lighthearted topics to talk about here at the Yarn, but I think all the more important that we do think of them because of their weightiness. Thank you.